Aye.
All right. Now, I call this looking at the end times. That'll be pretty self-explanatory before we get done here. This is just kind of an introductory lesson. Now, I will warn you, this lesson will bring up stuff that you want to discuss. We're not going to discuss it. In future weeks, we will discuss. Today is just sort of to give you an overview. So, I'm going to show you a series of 6 images. There is a place to write them down in your note-taking guide. So as I show you these 6 pictures, write down what you see in your note guide, because there will be a test at the end. Okay? So, turtle. Here we go. What? Yeah. Image number 1. Image number 2. Image number 3. Image number 4. Image number 5. And image number 6. I think in your note sheet it says, what would we have if we put all these images together? And there's a place for you to write in the answer that you think. If you made a composite with all those images, what would you have? Other than a mess. All right? So make your guess. I'm going to give you the correct answer in a minute. All right, here we go. This is one of my favorite pieces of poetry I'm going to share with you. It's called 6 Blind Men. It was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went out to see an elephant, although each of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against its broad and sturdy side, and once began to bawl, God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall. The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to each as mighty clear, this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out an eager hand, and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain," quoth he. "'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "Even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact you can. This marvel of an elephant is very much like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swing tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong. Though each was partly in the right, they all were in the wrong. And here's the kicker. So often theologic wars, or biblical interpretation wars, the disputants I've seen rail on in utter ignorance about what each other mean, and prate about an elephant that none of them have ever seen. So, that's the answer to the question. Those 6 images are an elephant, believe it or not.
I put Roman guard. I
this whole study. We're going to look at this list and then compare it to other scriptures. The other two places with major prophecy are Daniel chapter 7 through 12 and Revelation chapter 4 through 22. Now, there are lots of other scriptures about prophecy throughout the pages of Scripture. Isaiah has some stuff. Paul has some stuff in his writings, and we will pick those scriptures up. But those are the three main sources we're going to look at. Mainly Matthew's version of the Olivet Discourse, and then Daniel and Revelation. So, over the coming weeks, we're going to look at these three sections of Scripture, comparing and contrasting their messages, and as well as parallel passages in other biblical books. And we'll get to those as we go. So, let's start with the Olivet Discourse. The Olivet Discourse was part of Jesus' lessons to his disciples during the last week of his life. All right? We know from studying the Bible, the gospel message, Jesus did more teaching the last week of his life than he's done pretty much throughout the whole first 3 years. Most of it was with the disciples individually, as a group, but not with big crowds, but just disciples. He set them down and he taught. Excuse me. The Olivet Discourse was part of that. And it occurred following a visit to the temple area. Okay? They had been in the temple. The temple was a very beautiful, incredible structure. And when they left the temple, they went out to the Mount of Olives, which is why it's called the Olivet Discourse. A lot of the important things in Jesus' life happened on the Mount of Olives. The Garden of Gethsemane was on the Mount of Olives. When he left earth and went back to heaven, he took off from the Mount of Olives. The Scripture says he's going to return to the Mount of Olives someday in the future. So the Mount of Olives actually was adjacent to the temple area. When you were sitting on the Mount of Olives, you were looking across the valley into the temple area. Okay? Now, this is how Matthew's account begins. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call attention to its buildings. He said, "Look at this. It's incredible. Do you see all these things?" he asked. "Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." Now that was a pretty significant statement. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So if you notice, the disciples asked two things in that statement. One is, what will be the sign of your coming, the sign of your return to earth, and what will be the sign of the end of the age? Now, in essence, those are the same thing. The disciples saw them as being slightly different, but they're really pretty much the same thing. Okay? So that's what they wanted to know. What will be the indicators that you're coming back? What will be the indicator that the world's going to end, the end of the age? Okay? So, with that question in mind, Jesus launches into this teaching speech, if you will, that we call the Olivet Discourse. All right? Now, so, things predicted in this discourse was, in answer to their question, Jesus lays out a long list of things that will happen before his return. All right? Now, what you have in your notes is a place to list all these things. And then underneath it, you'll see this. Okay? Matthew and a space. It's always going to be Matthew chapter 24. It's always going to be Mark chapter 13. It's always going to be Luke chapter 21. So just write in the verse numbers if you want to have them. You can write in the verse numbers there for each one, so that when you go back and look, you can compare how Matthew, Mark, and Luke all recorded. Okay? So that's to help you know where you're at. So now, in this first lesson, we are just going to construct a list. And there's 19 things on that list you have in front of you. Hope we can get through all 19 of them. Of events and happenings that Jesus mentions in his Olivet Discourse. Now, you are going to want to talk about these as we go through them. I warned you about that earlier, and I'm warning you about it again. You're going to want to talk about them, but we can't, because we'll never get done. And what we're going to We will return to each thing on this list individually as we go through this study. So, if your questions don't get answered today, don't get uptight. That's my message. Okay, don't get uptight because we're gonna go through it. Okay. So what we want to do is over the next weeks we're going to look at things in light of what's going on in our world. Okay. Because as we look at this list, that's why you're going to want to talk about it. As we look at this list, you're going to see things and go like, oh, that was that. I heard that in the news yesterday. Okay. So that's where we're going to go. So let's start. First thing Jesus says is the destruction of the temple. And most of these are found in all three books. There's the references. Matthew verse 2, Mark verse 2, Luke verse 6. The destruction of the temple. And I will tell you up front, that happened. That was the first thing on the list. It was the first thing that happened. In 70 AD, just about 40 years after Jesus said it, the Romans tore the temple down. It has never been rebuilt, and we'll get into all what that means later on in this study. So the destruction of the temple is the first thing. The second thing that Jesus mentions is the rise of false messiahs. Okay? Mentioned twice in the Matthew account, twice in the Mark account, and once in the Luke account. Those are the verses. The rise of false messiahs. Believe me, I've got next two lessons already done. You're going to be blown away by the information I give you when we get to that one. Just blown away. Everybody's looking up, and I'll know about the make sure you get done in time. All right. Number 3. Wars, rumors of wars, and conflicts between nations. Again, mentioned by all three accounts. Now here's where this gets interesting. In the 2,000 years since Jesus left this earth, you know there's been about 5 or 10 years, something like that, total, that there hasn't been some kind of conflict going on someplace. Wars, rumors of wars, and conflicts between nations has been eternal ever since Jesus said those words. Okay, and we'll talk about the significance of that. The fourth thing on his list is famines. And again, mentioned by all three. When they're talking about this, Luke adds the word pestilences in verse 11 of Luke's account. Pestilence is basically a disease, natural disaster of some kind. Some people consider COVID in this category. Okay? Famines and pestilences. The fifth thing is earthquakes. And again, mentioned by all three. Just like wars and rumors of war, famines and earthquakes have been just about constant ever since Jesus said these words. Right? And again, we'll talk about why that's significant.